Okay, so during this retrograde Mercury, I've decided to switch today's and next Sunday's talk. So we just switched them around. So this morning, I'm going to be talking about the heart and the human soul. And next week, I'll be talking about the power of the heart. So that's the first thing. So if you have any objections, and then about this morning's talk. It's titled The Heart and the Human Soul, but I'm also going to be focusing on three centers: the heart center, the solar plexus, and the mind. So as you listen to the talk this morning, keep those three centers in mind: the heart, the mind, and the solar plexus, because everything in the talk this morning kind of swims around the axis of these three centers. And then the other thing, this is just kind of a casual conversation this morning. The soul. When did you become interested in your soul? When did you think about it? When did you begin to really seriously think about it? And then when did your conversations include the soul? Usually when people fall in love, they think about the soul and two souls coming together and having a soul mate. You know, all relates to love and the heart. So I'm just, I don't want anybody to verbally answer, these questions, but just to think about it. Think about it. I remember when I was about 1.5 years, I began thinking about the soul and wondering why it brought me back to the planet. But that's a little child, a little girl, thinking that, not realizing there's a purpose to all of this. But soul is so important. It's so important. And I think as you listen to the talk this morning, you're going to realize perhaps even more and more the power of the soul, the job and the responsibility the soul has in each life, and our responsibility to take care of our soul. So, let's begin. The teaching tells us that the human soul is the synthesizer of the heart and the mind and the solar plexus. So there's a seed thought. If you really want to understand this more deeply, take it into your meditation or think about it during your day or at the end of your day, to think about what does it mean that the soul is a synthesizer, of the heart and the mind and the solar plexus. We usually don't like to even include the solar plexus in anything because it doesn't have a really good reputation, right? So I really like this phrase as a seed thought. If our human soul is able to join these three centers and bring them together as a device of communication, the heart, the mind, and the solar plexus, then the soul puts us onto the path of perfection. So I guess this would challenge us to first do a little research, broaden our education about these three centers, and then to increase our sensitivity in our communication, with our communication, to see if the soul has actually synthesized these three centers and created them as a device of communication. Every heart is, in fact, the same essence. And I'm shifting a little bit to think about the heart. And so the heart is the teaching is telling us that the heart is the same in essence. But then our question is, then why aren't we all the same? You know, if the heart, in fact, is same in essence, then why are we all not the same? You know, why do some people have big hearts, other people have very little hearts, right? Why is this? Well, the teaching says that it's because of our different stages of evolution. That every heart is the manifestation of the human soul. This is something that's repeated over and over and over again in the teaching, that every heart is the manifestation of the soul. So the evolution of the soul and the heart are very important for us to understand and to realize in every single incarnation. So what this means is that if we're on the path of perfection, that first tells us that we are not yet perfect. We're on the path of perfection. It doesn't say, okay, now you're perfect, now you're on the path, right? We are on the path of perfection. So as souls, as personalities, we want to not get tired of strengthening ourselves, of perfecting ourselves, of expanding our consciousness, and to continue to work on ourselves. Think about when you first stepped into the teaching, consciously into the teaching, you found your group. You were so excited. It's like we came home. Some of us have stayed home. We've never strayed away. And this is a good thing. Home being the teaching, being the ashram. But others have just gone through that revolving door. They've come in, they were excited, this is great, then they got bored, and they walked out again. When we decide to stay home is when, meaning to stay in the teaching, is when the soul heard that knock on the door and said, I'm not going to waste this lifetime. I'm really going to dedicate myself to the evolution of my soul, which means the increasing light, or to release more light from the soul. And as we read these phrases, to increase the light, to release more light from the soul, means that we are beginning, through the expansion of our consciousness, to attune to the purpose of this life. That's the first thing. So as we attune to the purpose of this life, eventually we begin to see how there is a string of incarnations that, there's a knot here and a knot here and a knot here and a knot here on this string that all reflect this purpose. As the soul synthesizes the heart and the mind and the solar plexus, we begin to have a greater communication with higher spheres of life. So every heart is the manifestation of the human soul. Christ said to a disciple, what will you profit if you have the whole world in your pocket, but you lose your soul? This tells us that our soul, also known as the higher self, capital S self, is the highest treasure that we have. But how can we find our soul? See, isn't this a question that so many people have? How can we find our soul? The teaching tells us we find it by stripping our soul of all hypocrisy and of all that is not divine within us. So how beautiful it is when we relate to people with a clear conscience. And that means with clear love and honesty and beauty. When we are able to communicate with clear conscience, with clear love and honesty and beauty, that's when happiness and joy and bliss come into our lives. I couldn't help but smile at this because there's a beautiful book by Torgrim Serdarian called Happiness, Joy, and Bliss. So if you want to introduce yourself substantially to happiness, joy, and bliss, find that book and start reading it. Of course, you can find it on our online bookstore, but I don't want to advertise this too much. Your soul, this is another very important phrase. Your soul is the light that you travel by. Your soul is the light that you travel by. This reminds me of the Master Moria telling us how important it is that disciples travel all over the world. See, he took this idea and made it practical. What does this mean? It means when we travel throughout our country, throughout the world, we are taking light, our light, into that world, into that country, into that community, into that group. We're taking our light. Our soul is the light we travel by. But it is also something more significant, perhaps, than that, which is the soul light is what leads us to higher worlds. The soul light is what leads us to higher worlds. In other words, we're not going to higher worlds if we don't have light to travel by. If we do not have that light, we are in darkness. When our body passes away, it is the light of our soul that guides us into higher dimensions. Frequently, when someone loses a loved one, they'll ask, "What can I do now that my loved one has passed? What can I do to help them?" Give them your light. Talk to them intuitively about their light. And just tell them, go to the light. That's what this means. When you tell them intuitively or in your meditations or in your prayers, go to the light, you are telling them to reconnect with the light of their soul, and this gives them safe passage through the lower stratosphere of the subtle world. It is with the soul that we understand the value of other people. See, it's not the intellect, it's not our analysis of who that person is. It is our soul. So it's through our soul, through our heart, that we try to understand the value of other people. When we are able to do this is when we can truly and honestly appreciate them. Others will come to you and say, "Don't you know who that person is? What they have done? What their actions have been?" You don't need to know those things because you are seeing their value. See, from soul to soul, heart to heart, you recognize their value. So you're not concerned, you don't concern yourself with all the debris and the stupidities and their falseness and so forth. Don't worry about that. What you want to do is see their value soul to soul. And when you can do that, you're letting them be themselves. And they know that you see their value. It changes the whole relationship. If your soul is killed, your heart dies. That would be another whole Sunday morning talk. How do we kill our soul? Well, by not protecting it. In a nutshell, it's by not protecting our soul. So let me tell you a little bit more about the soul. Our soul progresses from the physical to the emotional, then from the emotional to the mental plane. When our soul finally reaches the mental plane, if that person is lucky, that person is going to meet a teacher. Find a teaching, or find the books or the philosophy that will tell him that the causes of his physical, emotional, and mental problems lie within himself. See, that separates the fluff from the reality. The fluff can be found, in opinions. But the reality is found in our soul. Our soul, if we have the courage to face the light of the soul, will show us why we have physical problems, why we have emotional issues, why we have mental problems, because it all lies within us. And when that person starts to look within, this is what happens. He finds ideas and visions to use for his future development. And that gives us hope. The inspiration, happiness, joy, and bliss. So this is why meditation is so important. True meditation. This is not relaxation meditation. I'm talking about, this is a meditation that's fiery, and that fire fuels our soul in such a way that it begins to progress and advance and move forward, just like climbing the ladder of Jacob, until it finally resides, in the mental plane. When the physical, emotional, and mental body are really aligned with each other, now we can say that that individual is a personality. And when that personality reaches the higher mind, now he or she becomes a soul. So first we have to become a personality, and then we become the soul, the awakened soul, no longer a buried spark. So at this point, the person has, because he has an integrated physical, emotional, mental body, now whatever he feels and thinks and does, his whole nature is integrated and no longer has cleavages between these three bodies. Have you ever said something to somebody and they say, are you sure? Can't I convince you otherwise? Wouldn't you rather do this or go there or become this and make this decision? Not if you're an integrated personality and that you become a soul. What you say is what you mean. And people may try to argue with you. And they may think that you're really off track, with your thinking. But see, the soul is able to part the waves of negativity and hatred and jealousy and envy and desire, and is so fused with the soul that fusion helps that person to understand the purpose of life. And that every little action that you take and every big action that you take must be in the field of the purpose of your life. So in the introduction, I said that the human soul is the synthesizer, right, of the heart and the mind and the solar plexus. If the human soul is able to join these three centers and bring them together as one device of communication, he enters into the path of perfection. So that's what I said in the opening this morning. Now, the solar plexus. Let's talk about the solar plexus. The solar plexus is the center of instinct and emotions. It's the center of instinct and emotions. This is where most people live. Many people communicate through their solar plexus because it's instinctive. Still others communicate through their mind. But interestingly enough, relatively few communicate through their heart. So it's very easy for people to communicate instinctively or through their mind, but their heart seems to be out of the equation. Communication through the solar plexus or instincts would be called, for example, instinctive awareness. Now, instinctive awareness is what some people say, well, I'm pretty intuitive, I'm pretty psychic. They'll say, you know, it's going to rain, or the weather is going to change and we're going to have typhoons, things like that. But also, what's very nice at some point is instinct causes people to feel the physical and emotional states of their family members and their friends. What's not so nice is that instinctive feeling may not interpret things correctly. But at least we have a ability of what they're going through. We may not know why they're going through it, but we know they're going through something. As our soul synthesizes the heart, the mind, and the solar plexus, then we have a deeper understanding behind it. And that deeper understanding behind it leads us to drop our opinions and judgmentalness. The solar plexus also acts as a mind in average people. And with various negative emotions, it controls their life. That's the solar plexus. It builds the mood. It builds our mood, their inclinations and choices. This may come as a surprise to you, but most of the time, even above average people fall under the control of their solar plexus. Especially when waves of anger and jealousy and fear hit them. Now, mental communication enables a person to utilize the life for self-interest. That's mental communication. So when you find somebody that is very self-centered, very self-interested, they're communicating through the mind, not solar plexus, not the heart. And that way you can tell those three centers are not yet synthesized. Through the mind, this kind of person is able to harness the energies and forces of life and use them to meet his needs, such as food and shelter and clothing. But the person also uses these same energies and forces to manipulate and exploit others to increase his own prosperity and luxury. Isn't that interesting? All mental communication is based on self-satisfaction and self-interest at individual and group levels, unless the mind is led by the heart. So the mind can create those situations which eventually trap others. This is the mind. Leads us to these situations that trap others and lead them into actions that are anti-survival. See how serious this is? You know, when I talk about serious, you can start with your friendships, with your relationships. Before you make a commitment, observe, is that person exploiting me? Convincing me because they have degrees behind their name, they have bank accounts in Switzerland, that they're right and I'm wrong, and then eventually they're going to lead you to anti-survival decisions. This is why disciples think before they act. People who live in their solar plexus act before they think. When the soul is synthesized, those three centers, and the person is now thinking through the heart, he's intuitively functioning within the field of his life purpose. Those who see the failure of their mind resign from the methods that they were using and seek refuge in their heart, in their soul, and that's their hope. Heart communication is related to motives, right motives, intentions, all-inclusiveness, understanding, compassion, and right human relations. Such a communication is immediate, it is direct, it is intuitive, and it sees the causes before the result manifests. The majority of people communicate through their solar plexus, regardless of the level of their education and their position. The solar plexus controls their lives. So it is possible to have a great amount of knowledge, but to still be controlled by the solar plexus. If we're not keen observers, if we're not vigilant in our observation, these are the people that are going to control the world. Your community, your family. But it is still possible. This is very interesting. To me, it certainly was. It is possible to unite the solar plexus and the mental channels. This is very dangerous. To unite the mental channels and the solar plexus. Now the mind begins to use animalistic urges and drives to satisfy his or her instincts. It also uses jealousy and hatred. Makes people jealous of one another. Turns people against, like our government. Hate your government. Be jealous of those that are in responsible position. That's the danger of when the solar plexus and the mental channels unite. They also fall into vanity and ego trips. Many pseudo-leaders, I believe, fall into this category, and then they create followers who want their instincts, their own ego, and their own vanities to be satisfied. Their angers and sense of personal injustice to be satisfied. So let's rise up in arms against ... It is also possible to fuse the solar plexus and the heart, but this creates difficulties between instinct and intuition. From my observation, this happens more frequently, in our personal environment, because the solar plexus and the heart are so close. These two centers work so closely together. They are physically very close together. But it does create a difficulty. So eventually, we must fuse these three centers and make the heart the dominating factor in our lives. And it is the human soul that brings these three centers together and creates integration and wholeness, within ourselves. Often these centers work one at a time. As our evolution develops, two of them act together, and in some cases, three begin to function together. This is the moment when the person becomes conscious and has expanded his consciousness, when the three begin to work together. The heart center, we know, has 12 sensitive petals which record the feelings of the heart. The 12 virtues. These 12 virtues are sacrifice, compassion, labor, group love, patience, sympathy, humility, tolerance, wisdom, service, gratitude, and spiritual identification. Now, some of us in the group are seriously working with virtues this year. We started last fall. Some of us are compiling information about a particular virtue that we want to put into our life, and we're practicing it. And we're discovering how the practice of this virtue is changing our consciousness. So someone might ask you, why are you doing that? Because a virtue comes from the core of your human soul. So at some point, it will be your human soul that will choose that virtue for you to begin to practice. It brings life electricity into our mental, emotional, and physical nature. A virtuous person is more successful, progressive, and creative than a person of vice. Virtue brings in energy. Virtues help us build our foundation, to build our future, and create striving to help us transcend ourselves. I'm going to start jumping through these ideas because we're going to go over about 3 or 4 minutes because we started a little late too, so bear with me. Let me pick out what we just can't live without knowing about. Okay. To be in tune with our heart means to be extremely sincere with ourselves and to see if we have any trace of self-deception. Once we stand in the light of our heart, then we can very clearly see our behaviors, our motives, our direction, and realize the damage that we may be doing to our future. An impure heart, a decaying heart, works against our own prosperity and future. We must try not to relate to people through our mind. Isn't that something? See how different of approach this is to understanding our relationships with others. We must try not to relate to people only through our mind and solar plexus. We must use the heart too. So first try to see yourself as you are and then look at the situation very clearly and intuitively and with compassion in order not to save your own face. You may be asking yourself, what is a pure heart? One who has a pure heart has pure motive. For example, hatred totally obscures our heart energy. Heart energy is the healing energy that is received from the sun and even from our galaxy. Master Morya says, if you know what contacts your heart has with the universe, you will respect your heart. It's so powerful. So we should not do anything that bothers our heart. The purer our heart is, the longer we're going to live. The purer our mind is, the more successful we are going to be in our life. If we do not have success in health, it means in the past we really messed up somehow. And now it is time to think about the future and not to have the same destiny. So there's hope. There's hope. So let me close with this. It is said that the greatest miracle in the spiritual life is a change of heart. How we touch others and how we live, how we speak and act are our contributions to the world. Embodying wise and loving being is not accomplished by enacting specific gestures or by allegiance to a particular relation. It's much more simple and basic than that. We embody it through the way we treat our neighbors, our families, our communities, our environment, and ourselves. The power of our heart is contagious, and the spirit of wakefulness and integrity is contagious. If we wish to have peace, we must be peace ourselves. If we wish to have love in this world, we must be love. Our children, co-workers, and friends will benefit most when we are a brother or sister to them. Bringing our bodies and hearts, our integrity and wakefulness to being together. When Gandhi was asked if he had any message for the world, he said, "My life is my message." That's something we should never forget, what he said. My life is my message. So what message does our life give? What qualities of our being do we bring into the difficult situations, into our life? Without words, in what way do we touch our friends and family and co-workers? What is the life force that we touch them with? How are they going to remember us? Remember that talk I gave, a few months ago? How will they remember us? Where do we live and embody our greatest wisdom, love, and virtue? Where do we not do so? So, if we were to live our life with true spirituality and love, how might we live?